I'm Mike Bloomberg.
I'm Elizabeth Warren.
I'm Tom Steyer.
And I approve this message.
This is an extraordinary man with an extraordinary career in public service. She's a janitor's daughter who has become one of the country's fiercest advocates for the middle class.
Mayor Bloomberg and President Obama worked together.
Fired up! Ready to go!
We need something different to beat Trump. Tom Steyer can bring it.
He's been a leader throughout the country for the past 12 years. Mr. Michael Bloomberg. Joe's candid, honest counsel made me a better president. Elizabeth understands what I strongly believe. The best part is he's nowhere close to finished.
All right, a mashup there, courtesy of our friends from the 11th hour on some of the ads from the Democratic candidates for president, all trying to connect themselves to former President Barack Obama. Joining us now ahead of tomorrow's South Carolina primary is the national president and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. Great to have you on the show this morning.
Derek, thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning. Let's
start with a question. Shouldn't a state like South Carolina be first in the Democratic primary? Because actually, you have a demographic breakdown that actually accounts for the importance of black voters in this process.
For many of us, we feel that South Carolina is, in fact, the beginning of the primary. It's more reflective of the Democratic Party. It's more reflective of the electorate in America. And for the NAACP, it speaks volumes in terms of candidates' interest and their value of the African-American vote. Have they invested in learning the institutions, talking to local communities to ensure that the needs and interests of African-Americans, not only in South Carolina, but across the country, are being heard, and they're speaking to those needs and interests.
It seems we find it in every debate that every white politician has sinned against black voters at some point in their lives. Michael Bloomberg constantly hammered on the stop and frisk. Bernie voted for the crime bill. Biden voted for the crime bill. Mayor Pete, of course, has had his problems in South Bend, Indiana. How do you believe black voters should sort through these past positions that are troubling to African Americans, not only in South Carolina, but across America?
Well, no individual will be perfect. The real question here is for candidates who've been running for 4+ years, or candidates who have been in the national limelight, have they made amends for any bad policy decisions? Bad policy decisions would take place. But I take a candidate like Bernie Sanders. For the last 4 years, have he spent a significant amount of time in South Carolina, in the African-American communities, to really hear and learn around the needs of interest? Or has he? In my opinion, I don't know. I think the South Carolina outcome would speak volumes. Has he invested the necessary political capital to say, hey, I have a major platform, but this important base of Democratic Party is so significant, I'm going to learn and listen and cater a message that appeal to them. That's for all the candidates, not only Bernie Sanders, and South Carolina outcome would tell the story.
So the same question, I guess, for Michael Bloomberg as it pertains to stop and frisk. Has he done something to make amends, if that's the right word? And if not, what in the world could he do at this point?
Well, I think the step in the right direction was come out and apologize and talk about it was a bad policy. And then from there, what are the things he's done since stop and frisk to try to recover from that very bad policy that our partner organization had to file a lawsuit against the city of New York to stop? Those are important questions. We have a problem in Minneapolis with a young man that's still serving time for a crime he did not commit, and that was as a result of prosecution by Senator Klobuchar when she was a prosecutor. We're still dealing with the question of aggressive policing in South Bend, Indiana. The crime bill has been a problem for many people who are still incarcerated, and that's as a result of the vote by Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. But South Carolina, what speaks volumes, and the voters are smart. It is the base of the party, and it's something that should not be taken lightly.
Shauna?
Yeah, I think one question that I have is, do you think the candidates so far have spoken about these things that affect the black community, things that affect the Hispanic community, which are the economy, healthcare, everything, but the racial factor on top of that makes it unique to these communities? Do you think they're speaking about that in white audiences enough? Because some of what I think people look for is, Are you not only willing to confront these issues and listen about these issues at the Black church in South Carolina on Sunday, are you willing to talk about it in a larger context? Do you think we have seen enough of that to really actually speak to the African American vote?
Absolutely. And let's be clear, the ultimate winner in November will be dependent on the black vote. If we increase turnout, the Democratic nominee will win. If the black turnout is level, the Democratic nominee will lose. Period. And so we spend so much time catering to a small fraction of the American voter, and we forget about the base. Michigan was lost by less than 11,000 votes, yet 28,000 people voted in the city of Detroit, an 80% black city, and they skipped the top of the ticket. That tells me that, one, that the Republican nominee was not appealing, and two, the Democratic nominee did not speak to those voters. I would hate for history to repeat itself.
Mr. Johnson, it's Willie Geist. Great to have you with us this morning. Joe Biden, despite his early struggles, New Hampshire, Iowa, Nevada, back in the polling among African-American voters in South Carolina this week, somewhere between 20 and 30% leads among those voters just this week. So how do you explain, because I think a lot of his appeal with African-American voters sometimes is reduced to, well, he was vice president to the first African-American president. But how do you explain more specifically why he does fare so well among African-American voters?
Well, I'm going to start with, you cannot minimize the impact of Congressman Jim Clyburn and his voice on Thursday. He is a powerhouse in South Carolina, politics, black and white, and he's a trusted voice in that state. So we cannot minimize that. Secondly, Joe Biden is not, he's familiar with the African-American community. He's active in the state of Delaware. He's been a life member of the NAACP. And I don't want to say this like I'm endorsing one candidate over the other, but there is a level of familiarity with Joe Biden, and that's important. And some candidates, they have just stepped up recently to try to become friends to the African-American community, and the African-American voters, we're too smart for that. We are looking for individuals who are more genuine than just showing up because they need a vote.
Jonathan Lemire.
Mr. Johnson, there were several African-American candidates as part of the Democratic field at the beginning of this race. Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Deval Patrick. None of them are still around as we move into South Carolina. There's been some talk that's because Iowa and New Hampshire went first. They're overwhelmingly white states. Others speculate it's because they've been crowded out by billionaires like Michael Bloomberg and Tom Steyer. What do you attribute to that, the lack of African-American candidates still around, and how disheartening is it for you?
Well, you know, first of all, the primary is a blood sport, and it's the survival of the fittest. But the money in politics almost make it impossible for any candidate, black, white, male, or female, to survive 3-4 primaries. But more importantly, we need to have a primary system that better reflects the diversity of this nation. Iowa is a blip on the screen when you talk about the bigger picture. New Hampshire is one of the whitest states in the country. When you start in South Carolina, you're really looking at the diversity of America. When you go to Super Tuesday, you're looking at the diversity of America. And with that diversity, it allows candidates of many backgrounds to truly compete. But we still have this barrier of money in politics. That is a hard thing to overcome, particularly with the cost of media and digital media and building out a true ground game. It's an expensive endeavor.
All right, Derek Johnson, thank you so much for being with us on the show this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.